Today we're going to talk a little bit about detachment, apathy, and motivation. And a lot of people like myself will talk about the value of detachment, right? We'll say that based on all these spiritual traditions that you should detach from the world. And as you detach from stuff, you'll be happier, you'll be more content, you'll be more free, and sometimes even more productive. Hey there, thanks for watching, and I'm glad these videos have been helpful. A lot of times I'll read the comments and see people asking, well, what do I actually do about it? Which is such a great question. And unfortunately, my experience has been that the resources out there aren't actually that good at helping people create sustainable change, which is why I started HG in the first place. HG coaches are trained on a curriculum that integrates all of my understanding into what is motivation, what paralyzes us, and how to create lasting behavioral change. So if you're ready to take the next step, HG coaches are ready to build the life that you want. They've helped people build careers, find relationships, build networks of friends, discover what their passions are, and pursue their hobbies. So if this sounds like something that you'd be interested in, check out the link in the description below. But a lot of times that seems really confusing for people, right? Because if you really think about it, it's your attachment to things that actually gets you motivated and moving forward. And a lot of people get confused by this concept of detachment versus apathy, because if I detach from stuff, doesn't that mean that I stop caring? And caring is the only thing that actually keeps me going. And a lot of people who will listen to people talk about detachment will kind of conclude that, okay, I can't afford to be detached, because if I become detached, then I'm going to sit around and do nothing. In fact, this sort of apathetic, nihilistic, mentally checked out stuff is actually what I struggle with every day. What I struggle with is to find motivation. And so today what we're going to do is explain a little bit about the difference between detachment and apathy, and in some ways how they're almost completely polar opposites. And we'll talk a little bit about the value and explain why detachment can be so good. And most importantly, we're going to sort of explain to y'all the mechanism behind which detachment actually helps people move forward. So in order to understand this, we have to start with an understanding of how we normally motivate ourselves. So normally I have some kind of internal drive and I have some sort of external resistance. So a good example of this is that, let's say I'm ambitious and I want to accomplish a lot, but I hate my job. So this is the sort of situation where I don't want to work. I don't really enjoy work. It's kind of like this barrier that I have to overcome. And what allows me to overcome the barrier of the boringness of work, the toxicity of work, the diminishing returns that I get from putting in effort, what I have to do to overcome the negative situation at work is some amount of ambition. And so some of y'all may sort of really wish that you were more ambitious, right? Because we see people who are doing the Sigma grind set and they're like super, super ambitious and they will tolerate a ton of pain. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to be hardcore and life sucks, but you got to be super ambitious. And so what we sort of do is we have this internal driver that we use to overcome the hump of resistance. And then what happens is there's this little equation that goes on in our head, right? Work sucks so much, so that sort of creates a certain amount of resistance. And if I'm ambitious enough, I can overcome the hump of disliking work. And that actually leads me to action, which then leads me to benefits like success and money and promotions and things like that. So this is sort of normally how we motivate ourselves. There's sort of this internal struggle between the world sucking out there and me ramping myself up internally, really juicing myself to overcome those negatives. Another really good example of this, if we want to step outside of work for a second, is loneliness and anxiety. So this is something that we deal with a ton in this community. I've helped a ton of patients with this kind of stuff, where it's like, okay, so I'm socially anxious and it's hard for me to make friends. When I go out and I meet people, oh my God, it's so painful. I look stupid, I sound stupid, everyone's judging me all the time. Social media definitely doesn't help that kind of stuff. So what happens is we kind of move out into the world, we get bludgeoned by our social anxiety, and then we retreat. And when we retreat, what starts to build up? A sense of loneliness. And so there's some research that shows that this is the loneliest generation in the history of humanity. And so the loneliness builds and builds and builds and builds and builds until it overcomes the resistance from the social anxiety, right? So here's this barrier of social anxiety. We try to move out into the world and we get swatted back. And then the loneliness rises. And once the loneliness surpasses the anxiety, then we're so desperate that we can't afford to be anxious anymore. And then we start moving forward. And so if we think a little bit about what drives us forward in life, it's this thing over here, right? It's that level of anxiety. It's that feeling of loneliness. It's the desperation of always being alone. And this is what we sort of think about as caring, because sometimes that stuff, like if that gets too toxic or too harmful, what we end up doing is becoming apathetic, right? So like if I don't have that driver, so I have social anxiety over here and the loneliness is building up over here. But if I become apathetic, if I mentally check out at work, if I sort of numb myself from the loneliness, that's really what apathy is. I stop caring about life and then I'm kind of stuck. And so that's usually how we work, right? Because if we're apathetic, we're not doing anything. And the only thing that we can use to overcome that hump is actually caring a lot. The more I care about my job, the more that I care about not being alone anymore, the more I'm actually going to motivate myself forward. But this is not really like a healthy or sustainable way to live life, right? In the case of ambition, it results in burnout. And in the case of loneliness, like it's so terrible. I mean, hopefully y'all don't know, but unfortunately, chances are many of you do, that the struggle between loneliness and anxiety sucks, like no matter how you cut it. Even if the loneliness rises to the point where you move out into the world, it's still a painful experience. And so what a lot of people will think is that, okay, like I can't afford to give up my attachments. I can't afford to give up the loneliness. I can't afford to give up the ambition, because then how am I going to do anything? And this is where detachment enters the picture. Because detachment is not about detaching from the world. It's actually about detaching from yourself. So when we really think about what detachment is, so like here's the world down here, and here's us up here. And we kind of sit in the middle. And I know that sounds kind of weird. What do I mean by that? So we kind of sit over here, and what we think detachment means, that we think it means removing ourselves from the world, right? Like I'm going to stop caring about stuff. But if you really look at it, what detachment truly means is removal from our own ego. So when we remove ourselves from our ego, that's when we actually become detached. Now, what does that mean? So I'll give you all kind of a simple example. Let's say I want to dance at a party. So I'm hearing the music. The music is fantastic. I really, really feel like dancing. What is it that keeps me from dancing? Because I can hear the music. I want to move. Maybe I don't know how to dance, but who the hell cares, right? Generally speaking, people who like dancing to music don't care if they know how to dance or don't know how to dance. You can still dance to the music and enjoy it. But what is it that keeps you from enjoying that moment in the world? It's not the world itself, it's your own ego. It's this idea that, oh my God, if I start dancing, I will look stupid because I don't know how to dance. People will think I'm an idiot. It's going to be so embarrassing. What will people think? So in that moment, there you are existing in the world, and you have something in the world that you want to do, that you really want to do, that you crave doing, that you are jealous when you see other people who are able to do it and you're unable to do it. And what is it that keeps you from doing it? It's not actually the world. It's not because the music sucks. The music is fantastic. What keeps you from doing it is actually your attachment to your own ego. So this is the thing that's really, really important to understand. When we're talking about detaching, we're not moving away from the world towards ourselves. We're actually moving away from ourselves and actually towards the world. And this is why people who are detached are able to dance like there ain't no tomorrow. They're able to actually live life to the fullest. If they go to karaoke, they can just sing karaoke and not worry about what other people think. Imagine what would happen if you went to a party and you didn't care what other people thought. Because if you really tunnel down into it, what is it that when we say care what other people think, what aspect of other people's thoughts do you actually care about? You care about their opinion of you. Their opinion of you is attached to your ego in the way that you're viewed, right? When a narcissistic person has a big ego, what does that mean? That means that everyone needs to think positively about the narcissistic person. So this is the key thing to understand, that detachment and apathy, and we'll get into this a little bit more in a second, are actually complete opposites. And what we're not removing ourselves from the world. What we're actually doing is moving more into the world and removing ourselves from ourselves. So what does that mean in terms of that motivation kind of diagram that we were thinking about, right? Because here's my ambition, here's my feeling of loneliness, and then there's the resistance that I encounter. So that resistance is things like, oh my God, what will people think? Or I dislike my job. And so if we look at that resistance that keeps us from moving forward in life, that resistance is usually composed of emotions and ego. And so what a detachment actually does is it lowers that resistance. And the beautiful thing is that once we lower the resistance, once there is no hump to overcome, then we can be driven forward by all kinds of things. We no longer need ambition to act. We no longer need that loneliness to move out and engage with people. And that may sound a little bit weird, but let's tunnel down into that. So what detachment actually does is lowers that resistance. And how does it do that? Because let's go back to the social example. I'm really lonely and I have social anxiety. So let's tunnel down into, okay, what is social anxiety? Social anxiety is the concern of what other people think about you, right? That's what social anxiety is. I'm worried what other people are going to think. Now, if I stopped worrying what other people thought, that would be freeing. That would be amazing. And the most important thing is that if I stopped caring what other people thought, I don't need loneliness to drive me to engage with other people. I can engage with other people through all kinds of other things like, hey, that person likes something that I like. That can drive me to form a connection with them. What about the work scenario, right? Because in work, but I genuinely hate the work. So this is where you got to stop for a second and you really got to think, why do you hate the work? So if you really talk to people, and we do this a lot, for example, through career coaching, we worked with hundreds of people now, and we understand why people hate their jobs. A lot of times the reason that people hate their jobs is because they're not recognized in their jobs. The effort that they put in is not appreciated, that they have trouble advocating for themselves and people are playing politics. Sometimes it's because the job is really, really, really boring. And even in those cases, why don't those people quit those jobs? Well, because they're afraid of the consequences of quitting a job. What if I don't find another job? What if people won't hire me somewhere else? So even if you look at each of those scenarios about why we hate the job, what we actually discover is that it's not the job itself that actually keeps you stuck. It's all of your attachments related to the job. It's wanting to be appreciated by your boss, wanting to be recognized, wanting to be respected by your peers, which, by the way, is what leads you to work extra hard to get that recognition. So any way you cut it, what you really discover is that attachment and ego are really the things that kind of hold us back in life. And since we're so attached to the opinions of others, we have to start to use these dirty fuels, these toxic motivators, like ambition and loneliness, to actually move us forward. And then we get kind of stuck because we believe that detachment means getting rid of our ambition or getting rid of our loneliness, whereas that's not actually what we're saying at all. We're not saying that you're getting rid of either of those. What we're saying is that detachment lowers the resistance. And so hopefully this is kind of making sense. And I want y'all to just think a little bit about what would life be like if there was no resistance to what you wanted to do. If you had a particular desire and your ego didn't say, hey, that's going to make you look stupid, or you weren't operating out of like fear of consequences or things like that, what would your life actually be like? And this is where a lot of people think, well, don't I need ambition or loneliness to motivate me? No, because once the resistance drops down to zero, then all kinds of stuff can motivate you. Interest in particular things, curiosity, all kinds of stuff actually naturally starts motivating you. Why aren't you motivated enough by those things right now? Because curiosity is not enough to overcome the ego, right? You can be curious about learning how to dance, and hey, like you go to a party and you're like, hey, like let me like learn how to dance, right? Let me be curious about this. That's beautiful. But the problem is that that curiosity is not enough to overcome the ego, which is why you don't live a life that is driven by curiosity. You live a life that's driven by loneliness or ambition. And so this is the beauty of detachment, because it lowers that resistance, it separates us from the ego, and it actually starts allowing us to live a life that's based on things like curiosity and interest, as opposed to like desperation, loneliness, or ambition. And so hopefully now you're kind of thinking, okay, so like this sounds pretty cool, like lowering that resistance seems pretty neat. So then the question naturally becomes, how do we cultivate detachment? And so now what we're going to talk about is the Sanskrit phrase called vairagya. So vairagya is the Sanskrit word for detachment. And there are certain ways that we cultivate detachment. And the most important way that we cultivate detachment is actually through awareness. So this may sound kind of confusing because in the West especially, we have this idea that the way to get better in life is to do more stuff, right? Like people who succeed are doing more stuff than people who don't. If you want to get ahead, you have to network more. You got to play politics. You got to update your profile on LinkedIn. The more you do, the more you get, right? And this is something that a lot of like success influencers and Sigma grind set folks are like, work harder, like have your hustle and have your side hustle and have your side hustle and your mini side hustle and like, right? You got to do more to get more. Even at work, right? People will say like, it's the go-getters who get promoted. And so this is the really bizarre thing, but that's actually not how it works. And if you talk to people who are lonely or are ambitious, what you'll find is that they exert a lot of effort, right? So even if you're someone or you maybe have a friend who's like stuck at home and struggles with anxiety, if you actually ask that person, how much effort are you exerting? They may be like self-judgmental and they'll say, oh, I don't do anything. But if you actually look at the struggle of their day-to-day life, it's actually really hard, right? Because even going out is like climbing a mountain. These little things that are easy for other people require so much effort from the person who is more attached, who is more engaged with their ego. So this is where it's kind of bizarre, but the source of vairagya, the most important source of vairagya is actually awareness. And what do we mean by that? Or how does that work? So this is really simple, where awareness precedes control. So if you've ever had dental work done, this is like the classic example that I use, and you're numbed, you can't control anything. If you can't feel it, you can't control it, right? You can also look at things like, let's say, people who are alcoholic and in denial. They are unaware that there is a problem. And without awareness that there's a problem, they can't really fix it. But if you talk to someone who's an alcoholic and is like going through divorce proceedings and getting like written up at work, the amount of effort they're putting forward is actually astronomically high. Every single day that they live is a struggle and a fight, and your spouse is arguing with you, your kids are mad at you, bosses are writing you up. There is so much effort, but there is no awareness. And we also know that based on evidence-based treatment of alcoholism, what is the solution? The solution is actually insight or awareness, right? And we kind of hear it in places like Alcoholics Anonymous, where they start every meeting with awareness building. Hi, my name is Alok and I am an alcoholic. And that is so foundational because once you understand what's going on, once you have awareness of not just the problem, but the whole system, then things actually become effortless. And there's one really good example of this, which is like, I don't know if y'all play video games, but like if you're good at a video game, people will look at you and will say, wow, that is so amazing. You must work really hard to be good at the video game. It looks so effortful. But when you're good at a video game, you actually don't expend a whole lot of effort. It's actually easy for you, right? But the question is, why is it easy for you? Because you understand. You understand the mechanics of the game. You understand the meta of the game. The more that you understand, the more easy things become. And this is the key thing about cultivating detachment. This is what the yogis figured out, is that if you want to live an easy life that is also happens to be like more productive, then you need to actually start with awareness. Because as long as we are numb to stuff, and as long as we don't understand how things work, we can exert all the effort in the world, and it's going to yield very few returns. And so then the question becomes, okay, how do we cultivate this awareness? And this is where there are a couple of simple answers. The first is meditation. And now some of y'all may be listening to this and thinking, okay, so are you saying just meditate? And like, sort of. Right? But I don't want y'all to just meditate. What I want y'all to understand is even if you're thinking, okay, meditation doesn't work for me, I've tried it a bunch, it doesn't help with these problems, you're missing the point. What I want you to understand is why meditation works, why we used meditation as the key way to develop detachment. Because yogis tested all kinds of stuff and what they settled on is meditation. And why is that? It's because meditation is the practice, literally the practice, where we skill up our ability to be aware. So the first thing is you should meditate. And what does that meditation mean? It means just be aware of stuff. The second thing that I strongly recommend that you do is spend time with yourself. So if we're talking about awareness, a key thing that we really want to be aware of is our reactions to stuff. Because it is in our reactions to stuff that we actually find our attachments. So if we go back to dancing at a party, what am I attached to? It's going to manifest in the way that I react when I'm at the party. So if I want to dance and the music is fantastic and I really want to dance, and then notice the reaction that you have within yourself. And that reaction will actually give you insight into the nature of the attachment. We spend so much time trying to overcome that reaction, right? We wrestle with ourselves. We try to overcome and conquer anxiety that we don't ever spend any time just sitting there and observing it. And so that's the problem, is that effort over that anxiety is not going to ultimately lead to success. What's ultimately going to lead to success is awareness. And so notice your own reactions to things, and in that sense, spend a little bit more time just with yourself. And the last thing that I want to share with y'all is a little bit of how you could be reacting to this video. So I want y'all to notice that when I say, hey, like spend some time like noticing things, notice your reaction to things, maybe try meditating. What is your reaction to this video, right? There's a decent chance that there's a fair number of y'all that are saying, oh my God, he's saying just meditate. I've tried that before. It won't work. So that's kind of interesting, right? So if you've been following me thus far, hopefully you kind of buy what I'm selling, in the sense that we have these driving motivators, we have these resistances, and we rely on jacking up our motivation to overcome the resistance. And wouldn't it be awesome if we no longer had that resistance? And you're like, yeah. But once I start telling you, okay, all you need to do is be aware, then what is your reaction to that? It's like, no, that's not going to be enough because I've tried so hard and it hasn't worked. Exactly. So stop trying so hard. Notice your own intrinsic reaction, because chances are that if you really tunnel down into that, and this is how you want to know how to build awareness, we're going to do it right now. Tunnel down into that. Why are you so skeptical that this is going to work? If you tunnel down into your skepticism, there's going to be emotion there, right? There's going to be fear. What if it doesn't work? Or it's going to be frustration and regret. I've tried this before and it didn't work. I don't want to waste my time. There's going to be all kinds of emotions, negative emotions tied to your resistance to doing what I'm asking you to do, right? Because that's what it is. It's the resistance. And what is the resistance? It's emotion. And anytime there's negative emotion, there's ego. And so now we see in this moment that if you try to push forward, you'll feel that resistance. And it's actually telling you, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And how do we actually overcome that? Notice that reaction. We can do it right now. Notice that reaction. Why is it that I'm so resistant to trying this? Why is it that I'm so resistant to meditating? Because I've tried it and it didn't work. I've been burned. I've wasted my time. I can't afford to waste time anymore. And if you have those kinds of thoughts, what is that? Those are attachments, right? You can't afford it. Oh my God. The only times we can't afford things are when we're attached to things. I can't afford to set boundaries with my boss. I can't afford to rock the boat in my relationship. When you can't afford to do something, that's an attachment. So I know it sounds kind of bizarre, but the truth of the matter is that detachment and apathy are actually complete opposites. And it's the fact that we get confused about that we assume that those are the same thing, that we actually try not to cultivate detachment. Because we've started to build a system of motivation that relies on attachment to overcome our resistance. That's the only way we can move forward. But if you really want to be free of all of that crap and be free from the only motivator being this toxic motivator or dirty fuel like ambition or loneliness or desperation, then you have to cultivate detachment. And the beauty is that cultivating detachment from your own ego allows you to actually live more fully within the world.